What's up, everybody? My name's Indy, and that gentleman way over there in the middle, that is Jay. And this is the Indie Game Business Show. And in the middle, we have Emre. Well, how do you say your last name?
Deniz.
Deniz. Okay, well, that's easy. Yeah. People ask me, they're like, because my last name's long, right? And they go, how do you spell that? And I want to go Long.
Yes.
Yeah, it's Long. The best thing is my wife's name is Rochelle, right? And it's Rachelle. And 9 out of 10 people call her Rachel. Like, do you not know how Rachel is spelled?
Yeah, no, I can see that.
That's funny. The reason I asked Emre when we first started talking is like, how do you pronounce your name? Because I have a tendency to overthink names. It's the same because when you deal with people all across the world and you've got different pronunciations and different dialects and nuances, it's like I'll take the simple name like Long and be like, is it Lung? Is it without thinking?
Right.
It's probably just like the simplest answer here. So anyway, Emre, thank you so much for coming on the show, especially since it's 4 a.m.
4 a.m. Crazy.
Yeah, 4 a.m. in New Zealand.
We're going to try to keep everything nice and concise so you can actually get a little bit of sleep before you have to get up and start going again.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's we take it pretty easy where I work, so I can probably rock up pretty sleepy for the whole day.
Probably just rock in there at 6 a.m. No big deal, right?
Well, I mean, I had big plans for my day today, but then the Steam Summer Sale started yesterday. And
what? Well, I didn't even know.
Yeah, I saw that.
Steam Summer Sale's in effect. I've already spent about $50. And it's noon here my time. So Emre, I reached out to you initially because you had as you said, a brief moment of vulnerability and a wonderful Twitter thread back at the end of May on how you got into the industry and your journey and the challenges and all of that stuff that comes up. And it's one of those things that you don't see very often. People don't talk about it. People, the things that are difficult in the industry that need to get out there and people need to talk about, they don't talk about it, And so, that was one of the reasons I wanted to have you on was, to explain that journey. And we're going to talk about perseverance and how you go about doing a lot of the things, even on the basic level about setting up companies and how you decided to go to New Zealand and all that kind of good stuff. But let's start with, how did you get started in the industry and walk us through your career and even that 7-year pre-career episode? Because that's the interesting part. Most people work at something for 7 years, and if it doesn't work out, they're like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah, of course.
So let's start there. Walk us through that part.
Well, I think the backstory there is that so I was studying in university in, I think it was game design. We're the first cohort, second cohort. So the year before me was, for example, a student called Alexander Bruce who made Antichamber. So this is like how far back we're going now. Basically, second year, global financial crisis hit. So all of the AA and AAA studios in Australia got shut down pretty much like within a month of each other. And I remember our lecturer kind of walked in and said, like, that's it, folks. You might as well just pack your stuff up, go across the road to the trade school instead. Like, that's, if you ever want to make any money or like, have a living, you're done for games. Like there was no indie market back then or anything like that. It was just kind of like you either go to work at the studios or that's it. There was no Unity. There was no, I think Unity had just like launched. Unreal was still, you had to pay, hundreds of thousands of dollars for licensing it. Or you could just mess around in UDK. And then I dropped out of uni. I basically just said, all right, well, that's the end of that. I'm going to go find some work. And I ended up becoming a nightclub bouncer. And I did that for a long time, like 6-7 years, I think. I was bouncing between that, and I worked as a armed security guard, like cash and transit work. So had a very kind of interesting entry into making video games, but definitely like always kept that as a goal or where I wanted to go. And obviously, I lived on the sidelines of the whole resurgence of the indie scene, or like our local economy as well here. And then I think 6 years ago now, I started work as a 2D artist, like a concept artist at a part-time or like contract work. And then, 2017 had my own kind of subsidiary studio from a parent company. And now we're in 2019. And we run a game studio out of Wellington, New Zealand. We've got 14, 15 people on staff. We're making a 2-year-long RPG adventure game. Things are good. And that's the very brief overview of how a nightclub bouncer becomes a studio director.
I don't think that's actually any more unusual than routes that we see getting into the. We used to. I told somebody this earlier on a podcast when we were transitioning our agency about 12 or 15 years ago into a publisher. We didn't have producers. We had like one or two of us that knew enough about, games to produce, but we would literally go down to GameStop and hire the retail staff to be testers as a test case, and then immediately bump them up to producer. So, within like 6 weeks, you'd have somebody going from running the register at GameStop to producing casual games. And it's just one of those things. It's like there's not a normal route into how you do this, and so we're always interested. It's always fun to hear, how people got there, because it's not.
I was a bouncer in a biker bar there for a little bit. I just want to say, in chat here, how's it going, Divinorum? Thank you so much for showing up, and Whitlock, thank you for the awesome raid with a party of 21. That's amazing.
Nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cool.
And welcome to Indie Game Business.
So in the course of being a bouncer and an armed security guard, you mentioned you have high points, you have low points.
Yeah.
But you still had the passion to get into the industry and be doing this. What did you do, when you hit that bottom valley and then like, this is pointless, or, this isn't what I want to do. How did you talk yourself into keep going? What did you do to bring yourself back up at that point?
It's a good question, right? Like, because there's a lot of stuff in that thread that I left out, because I really want to kind of kill that line of advice that people do about, if I did it, everyone else can do it, kind of a thing. Because there was a lot of times when I was just like, I'm barely making ends meet. I'm barely making rent. And anyone who's worked in especially bouncing will know that like it takes a big toll on you. Like you're working 10 hours a night. You don't see that much sunlight. I've seen more sunsets and sunrises on the opposite kind of order than I would like in one lifetime. But I think what kind of keeps us all there, or trying and continually kind of working away at these things, is knowing that that's a tangible goal. Like it didn't matter what game I was working on, whatever jobs I could find that were even tangential or close enough to games. I was always trying to just like take it. So I remember like I was doing art assets for like Flash game people that I'd met on Newgrounds. I was trying to like teach myself Unity, but it's really hard to learn a whole new skill set when you're coming home really, really like tired every day. I think that the best description I have is that every night you go to sleep, and if you're staring into the maw of like being displeased at the trajectory of where your life is heading, that means that you still have work to do. Like, it's not until you find yourself being quite content that you've either accepted the fact that you're going to leave and you're not, going to chase your dreams, or that that you're there, you're the base of that big mountain and you're going to summit that thing. Getting to that mountain, or getting to that start of that journey was challenging enough. I think that in itself is like a huge target for a lot of people. Like, a lot of people just want to get their foot in the door just so that they can get the chance to work hard. So like, I don't think it ever crossed my mind to like not do that. I don't think that there was ever a time where I thought, yeah, I'm gonna do security instead, or I'm gonna do something different instead. It was always kind of like, one day I'll get into games. I just got to figure out how I'm gonna do it, and then just try different vectors until someone let me in, basically.
And so now I've got like 5 more questions. So you mentioned, the taking those tangential jobs, and a lot of the folks that have that mentality of, I have to get in the industry no matter what. How do you feel that relates to, the current problem we have with turnover in the industry? Is it, because these companies like Activision and Telltale and EA, and they have no problems firing 200 people because they know there's another 600 that are waiting to do the job, most likely cheaper. One of the things that we tell developers is you have to, when you're looking at some of these jobs and it's like they're going to pay you minimum wage, sometimes less than minimum wage to do it, you have to have enough respect for yourself
100%.
to not take a job that's going to be toxic for you, basically. So how do you, feel about the yin and the yang of that? And where what's that line, basically?
I think the line for me now, it basically sits at trying to make sure that the ladder that I got up is different for people coming in now. So like, we've got a couple of juniors, more than a couple. I think we've got like at least 4 people who this is their first job in the industry. And we've made sure to have a lot of things in the way that we operate our company that we would have liked when we're coming up. Like, I know that one of the questions is always going to be like, how did you get your first job, or what was your first job like? My first job in games, I worked unpaid because no one figured out that I was only a contractor. So I worked in the company until they accidentally assigned me a computer and a desk, and no one figured out that I wasn't actually a full-time employee for like 3 months. And then they kind of walked up, and I remember like I was so embedded doing art assets with different projects that they had to pull me into like a boardroom meeting and kind of say, hey, your contract ended like 3 months ago. How are you still turning up to work at 9 to 5? That's because there was like no jobs, there was no security, there was no, salary-based positions. So we try and do a lot of things differently now so that, none of the people that work here with us have to go home kind of being worried or stressed or like staring into their version of a big giant maw. I think there's a lot of companies that are trying to do the right thing nowadays, especially like a lot of kind of single A or double A companies that are founded by people who have been through those cycles, like, who've been part of massive layoffs or who've been part of disenfranchised kind of like groups of developers that got shafted at the end of a release cycle. I think they're doing a lot better in terms of trying to have policies and conversations. That means that junior folks coming into the industry at least have some semblance of knowing when they're being mistreated or when they're not being given the equity that they need.
So what are the things that you're doing at Studio Mayday to help prevent that? There's always a big hype this time of year around here in the States on the sports side, because you have the NFL draft and the NBA draft, and they're always like, they send them to rookie camp, and it's not just, sports skills that they're teaching them. They teach these, players, some of which came from literally nothing growing up, how to manage the multi-millions of dollars that you're going to get paid. And I almost wish we had something like that for developers. It's like, okay, welcome to the industry. This is what you need to look out for. This is what you need to be careful of. And until then, we have the show. So, what are some of the things that y'all have done at Studio Mayday to help bridge that gap for those developers?
That's a good question, and I totally agree with you. Like, there's so many things that people don't know about or assume, and that pendulum swings both ways, right? Like, sometimes developers think that, or in the industry, that we have legal protections that we don't have. They're not even there, and then workplaces will give them, depending on the context. And sometimes we get taken advantage of in ways that are illegal, but we don't know what the laws are. So I think in terms of policies, we have a lot. So it's, it'll take too long to kind of list everything. But, like, we have flexible work hours. We have refundable sick days. We've got like a rostered day off / like a healthcare day. So if you've got life admin stuff that you need to do, once a month, you can kind of just go message me and say, hey, I need a day off today to go take care of like family stuff. Go take the kids to an appointment, or gotta go to see the doctor, or I've got a moving day or something. What else we got? We internally advertise all of the pay schedules pretty openly, so everyone knows how much they're getting paid, why they're getting paid that amount, what the next step is, and they could extrapolate how much everyone else is getting paid based on those kind of parameters as well. So there's no kind of disparity of how well you bargain or how well you pitch yourself that is going to dictate how much money you should earn here.
Everybody knows everybody else's salary?
Everyone knows how much money you could make based on your years and skills and kind of like your position. So not by individuals, because that'd be breaching some HR stuff there, but the internal handbook.
There's a studio that does that. I've seen it in the news, but I think they're in France or Canada or somewhere, but they have complete and utter transparency, which is fascinating to me on that end too. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, and that stuff works really well. It's just that people individually might not be so comfortable. You have to keep in mind that there's essentially a lot of social stuff here. That means that healthcare is free, education can be subsidized. There's pretty generous welfare conditions as well. New Zealand, unfortunately, however, has some pretty dodgy laws when it comes to screen industries because of, it's called the Hobbit Law. So it basically means that, I'm not even kidding, right? This thing is a bane on our industry over here at the moment. So Peter Jackson basically said, I'm not going to film The Hobbit because it's too expensive. So the government said, all right, how about we pass this exemption, which it would enable us to hire a contractor game developer for an indefinite amount of time, have no benefits, no overtime, we don't have to pay their kind of what's called KiwiSaver, like their kind of savings account, and that kind of stuff's pretty bad. So we've rolled back on a lot of those things. People have, they have the salary and then time and a half for overtime, or ×2 if they have to work weekends, which means that we can't call people up to do crunch time over weekends because it's so expensive to do that. So there's a lot of stuff. What else is there?
I want double time for weekends.
Yeah, we all do, right? Like I've worked a lot of weekends in my life, so I don't want anyone coming into the office unless they know that they're getting paid a crap load of money to do that. And things have been working well in that regard. Even at like our stressful kind of deliverable periods, I know that the feedback that we had internally at the office was everyone kind of said that was stressful, but it was still fair. Like it still felt good, that the morale was high. Everyone was kind of feeling good, even though that they were working at a very rapid pace. So they try and get the work done within the 8 hours of the day, as opposed to knowing that they're going to have to spend 12 hours for weeks on end.
And I think we tend to see much better working conditions in indie teams than we do in these factories like what is the Tiburon down in Florida. They know hell or high water they're shipping a Madden game in August. That and if that means you're working 12 16 hours a day for months on end, that's kind of what it means. And that's always the part of me when I go and speak to middle school, high school, even college kids, and they're like, "Oh, I would love to have a job, working on Madden," and I'm just like,
"Oh shit,
I have no idea." One kid told me how bad he wanted to be a game tester, and I said, "What do you think a game tester is?" And he's like, "Well, you get to play games all day." And I said, "Well, let me clarify. You need to go over to that wall, slam your face into the concrete for 7 or 8 hours, and then take you a 15-20 minute break, and then go back and do it again." Because that's a lot of what testing is at these big companies. I said, "You're not going to be sitting there playing franchise mode in Madden for 4 seasons in a row. You're going to be sitting there running the same play 500 times to make sure that it doesn't break." So it's I love that there are studios out there that are taking the effort to say, okay, listen, we know this isn't being done right in many parts of the industry, but we're going to fix it as best we can on our side. That's awesome. I congratulate you on that part. And to see, we've already gone on such a tangent. I have to go back and look at my notes now. So when you're, in that early stage of, you're still working another job, you're wanting to put your own team together and do your own game, you're going to hit those low points like we talked about. But when is the best time to step back and say, okay, is this something that is worthwhile long term, or do I just need to, throw in the towel for a little bit? What's the point that you remember, or that you recommend for anyone? Is it that misery point that you brought up earlier, or is there something else that should work as a trigger, basically?
That's a good question. There's 2 good examples I can think of. There's a misery point, right? Like the misery point is something that can come even when you're working in like a games company, or if you're working that kind of ideal job. That can always happen, and you should always seek to try and remedy, the situation if you can. If you hate going to work in the morning, like it's a huge privilege, I think, for someone to actually enjoy waking up to go to work so that they can, provide shelter and feed themselves and save up money to feed their family. Like that's something that's not lost on us. But before that, like I used to run a company called Opaque Space, and I left that as the kind of director because we were building military products, and that's not something that was making me happy. Like one of the things that I left out in the forum, in that thread on Twitter, for example, was the fact that, my first company, I was actually getting to a very prominent kind of role as an XR kind of expert, I guess, for all sorts of weird places, like the US military or the Air Force specifically, all the way to the Navy in New Zealand. And we were lining up a couple of contracts. We'd already executed a couple of contracts. And it was this whole new life was emerging where that was not what I wanted to do at all. Again, like probably a really stupid decision in terms of like hindsight, because there was those military things can be quite lucrative, but it's just not what I wanted to do. So when the idea came up of I don't enjoy doing this anymore at all, I kind of need to go back to games. I just wanted to pursue that. So I had a lot of good mentors at the time who were people who run their own studios who kind of gave some good advice, but ultimately it was miserable having to contribute to an ecosystem that was like almost surreal at this stage. Like I've been to arms shows where they've got like rifle stands with anti-material rifles that are pointed out of the exhibition kind of center, looking out to a park across the river. And I thought, like, wow, what a way to sell a gun. Like, here you can demo this scope by looking at like families having picnics and stuff. Like, it was getting weird. I didn't know that Saab, for example, makes anti-tank weapons. They do. So they make cars and a whole line of AT stuff. And the schedule was crazy. Like I was flying all over the place. And then I basically I think I spoke to like the board of directors from my parent company and just said I'm resigning. I'm done. I'm not going to do this. Like I think I had one arms show too many where I was speaking about XR training that I kind of went, no, I'm done with this. Like this is not the future I wanted. The thing that happened in bouncing though, I wouldn't even call that like misery or anything. It's more like staring into like this abyss of nothingness. As long as you don't feel like you're actually contributing to the journey that you want to have. It just feels like repetitive. And I think anyone who does like shift work to try and make ends meet will probably have a very similar story in that, it just feels like every day is the exact same day over and over again. And you feel like you're stuck in this like tiny bubble of an ecosystem and the rest of the world is just moving on. That's like a whole new level of, I think, misery or desperation. I wouldn't really wish that on anyone. So we try and help people find jobs as much as we can. It's like, we spent hours, if not weeks, for the Mayday site to have like a whole, 30-page or maybe less than I cut it down, like hiring tips for students and juniors. Like, this is the stuff you can do. This is the like resources you can read. These are like Twitter threads that people have made about how to structure your resume, etc. Because I wouldn't wish that on any kind of person looking to break in.
So wait, is that on the studio? Is that on the site now?
Yeah, it should be. Unless it should be on there. Let me have a look.
I'll find that. And we'll post it up here and put it in the links as well.
Yeah, it's studiomayday.nz. Should be just about. I think it's on the careers side. Yeah.
Application tips for job success.
Yeah, that's the one. So we got good feedback from people in regards to that. But that entire thing and everything that we do as a studio comes from that foundation of remembering, how we broke into the industry and remembering what it was like before then, and the difficulties and challenges and stuff.
That's awesome. So you talked about how you found your own pace and you would look at other people and they were quote unquote ahead of you in the industry and they were already making great things. How did you go about finding that pace on your own?
I think there's I don't know. I think there's some, like, for myself anyway, looking back, there's always going to be some rose-tinted glasses because there's survivorship bias, like things worked out so that it's a happy story. But I think that the same type of like feeling is prevalent in anyone who's making content or anyone who's trying to set themselves up to complete a goal, in that they look at the people around them who are, successful or they're accomplishing things. And we have so many metrics for things nowadays that you can actually like tangibly see the numbers of this person's doing better than me at what I want to do. Whether that's in like, followers or it's views or it's game sales or it's awards. I think my own pace was dictated by the idea of once I can actually do something on games and pay my rent, that's a great pace for me. That's something that that to me was just like the life dream. A lot of people have these things of like, they want to be creative directors, they want to build their own, like MMO game someday. I just wanted to be able to pay my rent and save money by working on computer games. That was the whole goal. I don't have like a dream game or something that I wanted to build. It was just I want to be working in the games industry. So that to me, that pace was literally someone has to give me some money to do this shit at some point. Like someone's gonna cover my grocery bills at some point.
I agree. I had a venture back, CEO once try to sell me on their product by telling me how much money I was going to make, helping them. And I said, that's not, that's not what motivates me, and it's getting up and very much the same thing. It's just like, I want to make sure that my family's taken care of and paid for. But aside from that, I want to make sure I don't dread coming to work every morning and that I am enjoying this and we're helping people at the same time we're running a company. And so, he said, oh, so you're not looking, he said, your goal isn't to be wealthy, it's to be content. And I was like, yeah, pretty much. That word sounds like you're kind of sacrificing, but you're not. I mean, it isn't worth it to be, never seeing your family and working these 12-hour, 15-hour days just so you can make a couple extra $1,000, unless you are absolutely ready to give that up, in a year or two before you lose touch with your family and, go and spend that money. But I agree, to answer my own question a little while back, it is, to me, that point when it's not worth doing anymore is when you don't enjoy it. When you don't have to come into the office bouncing and smiling every morning. God knows I don't, but that's usually a factor of how much coffee I've had more than anything else. It's a matter of, am I enjoying what I'm doing? I like doing, in your case, I like working on the VR side, but I don't really like making weapon systems. I want to, use this for something better. So yeah, that's a point there. One of the lines that I pulled out of your Twitter thread was, "Don't let people tell you opportunities knock once, because you're the one who built the door for them to knock on, and there will be more." So what should teams be doing to make sure they're constantly rebuilding that door? Because I agree with that statement 150%. It's what do they need to be doing to make sure there's always a door there for someone to knock on?
It's a good question. It's, last year, I was flown to Prague for, Wargaming has something called 4C, which is like the developer conference. Like, they're such a big company now, I guess, that they can actually like pull in developers from around the world to speak about like different topics. And the topic that I spoke about at that conference was about how to turn a sinking ship into a submarine. Because that's what happened. Like, we were in the other previous studio, we were working on developing VR content to help with, research into astronaut training. We were doing some stuff with the ESA, and obviously we had a bit of a background with NASA by that stage already. But it wasn't paying the bills. Like, it was still really difficult for us to be able to be a service studio or a content studio. So we pivoted to developing our own IP based on the stuff that we had built internally. But the big lesson there was that you as long as you have the tools available to you, whether that's yourself or a team or having a studio, even just a tiny bit of runway, you can always take stock of what you have and try to find opportunities in, a market demand that's not being met. Like, could be publisher opportunities, could be even reaching out to your contacts or your networks to say, we have a full team ready to go. Who's got a license for us? Or even this year, for example, there's probably dozens of studios around the world that have been signed up to really, really lucrative kind of content deals, because the money base right now is starved for game development, especially people who can deliver. So knowing the ecosystem, especially what's on the horizon, what's coming past that. For us, VR was quite hot at the time. but we got in just a little bit later than the honeymoon period of investment spending. So I think even in your personal life, like looking at the skills that you have and trying to find ways to develop those skills to create opportunities is something that is it's difficult to do that, but it's not impossible. And it can be as simple as, if you feel like you're a charismatic person doing communications or PR, or if you're feeling like, you've got some art skills, fan art, doing modding, anything that you can do to try and build at least a portal that someone can email you and say, hey, that was really cool. How would you like to help us with X and Y? Or if you're a business or if you're a studio, looking at any pivots that you can do, like turning your tools into IP, any ideas that you have that you can pitch to publishers, knowing that, which financiers are looking for getting money out into the ecosystem, or which platforms are looking for deals. Essentially, like those are all really great kind of methods that people can employ, and to scale as well.
And one of the important things that Ed Dilly brought up when he was on was, he tells his clients, even if you're looking for contract work, always have an original pitch that you're shopping.
100%.
And it's extremely important. And there's tools. I mean, I agree. Learning the business side, the biz dev side of the industry is not easy, and it's not inherent for a lot of people, especially if you're a engineer or a designer. If you're not that business person to start with. But there's a lot of things out there between CRMs. It's like we use Nutshell to track everything internally, but you can even do it in a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
But we always make sure we check in with people every 3 months. And so because things change in this industry extremely fast. And so it's very important to always have your name out there, because you don't know, you just hit somebody, at the right time and a deal happens.
Absolutely.
We get a lot. And, so one of the things that my firm does is help developers and publishers set up meetings and find people to meet with at, trade shows, which is part of what has spawned our own event that we do. One of the things, I'll come back and I'll be talking to the same developer like the next year at the show. And I had one say, okay, I want you to help us get meetings this year, but we don't want any meetings with somebody we met with last year. We're already talking to them. And I said, okay, so when was the last time you talked to them? And they're like, well, last year at GDC. I'm like, that's not how it works.
No, it's not.
You have to stay in constant contact, because that's how you stay top of mind with, especially like publishers. If you're out there looking for contractor work for hire things, that way, they're not going to remember somebody they spoke with 6 months or a year ago. But if you're, talking to them, giving them an update on what you're doing, and then, 5 or 6 weeks later, they have an opportunity pop up, you're going to be one of the first studios that comes to mind,
Exactly right.
And so it is one, I agree. It's not something that's inherent, but it's something that developers can learn, and, they can find some tools that make it a whole lot easier on you. In the meantime,
we got a question from Chocolate Rain. Question: biggest regret / mistake in the industry?
Oh yeah, I think my biggest regret is I spent a lot of time in my first kind of year running a team or a studio, traveling, and I don't remember like a lot of it. I burnt out so hard that I was told, or I remember now, that I've been to Tokyo and Vancouver, for example. I have no idea that, like, I don't remember being in those cities in the slightest. If it wasn't for photos of me being there, I would not be able to tell you what I did in Japan. Yeah, it was massive burnout. I hit it so hard that, and so much stress, like self-imposed stress. I think that's always going to be like a huge regret, that I should have never gone from being a pretty young developer, like 3 years in the industry, or 4 years, I think, at that stage, to operating with like a sense of arrogance, I think, of how easy it would be to do business development and team management and company management and all these other like really difficult things that are all completely self-enclosed jobs, as well as directing production and a game, and trying to get new contracts at the same time. It was just really painful. Like it was so harsh, and I would advise everyone to treat, if they run their own company, if they run their own team, if they're looking to do those things, that they treat the business development side and the studio management side of those things as completely like 100% full-time jobs in themselves. They're really difficult to take on. It was big, solid crash and burn on that one. Like it took me months to kind of get over the burnout from that.
So that's a perfect segue into me plugging our event. So I did the very same thing. I mean, I've been doing this on the business side for 2 decades now, and so I've burned out several times. I'm on my third or fourth burnout at this point. But 2 years ago, I did the same thing. I was traveling constantly. I didn't get time at home, to spend with my family. And when you travel, no matter how good our technology is, you always end up getting behind on things, and then you have to catch up. And then, you're getting ready for the next show. And so that's the reason, I sat down last year and I said, I'm not traveling at all. And I didn't go to a single show anywhere. And I reached out to Indy and we started this show. I was like, I'm going to take the money I normally spend on travel, and we're going to do a show to help, teach people about, the business side of games. And then early this year, we started, reaching out to developers and saying, okay, what do you want to get out of, these events like GDC? Where do you feel like you need the most help? And it's the business part. I mean, it's the travel part. It's so expensive to go, especially like from where you are up to, San Francisco to go to GDC. And so if you go to indiegame.business, there's the page for our online events that we do. And so, we sit down and we partnered up with Meet to Match, and you can go and find the people that you need to meet with, and you don't have to know them in the first place. It takes the cold call out of the whole thing. There's a directory of who's going to be at the show, what they're looking for. You find the ones that make sense, you send them a message, and when it's time to do the meetings, which is the next one is July 17th and 18th, you just do a video call. And it's that simple. And so you can do a lot of the stuff that you do at a conference when it comes to networking and business development, just simply through, from your own home or office. And so, I agree. It's you can spend every week on the road somewhere in this industry. There's a show going on somewhere, but it's not always, the best use of time and money and sanity.
Can't agree with that enough. It's very like if you're not getting subsidized in some way, those conferences can really make a dent. Like it was for me, I generally aim to speak at every conference that I went to, so I could get myself either a free ticket or we always had like a booth set up. The Australian government was quite aggressive about providing funding for travel, for business development, because it's an export product. And like when we started hovering into like the military defense kind of industries, they were happy to send us on whatever they could find. But it's just like business development in itself is an extremely stressful and constantly demanding job to do. It never ends. There's no end point for biz dev. For us, like our biz dev side is kind of comfortable now only because we have such a long-term project. Like, we don't have to worry about, like we can't scale at the moment because we're out of office space at this point. But next year, the cycle will start again. We'll have to be back out on the road, talking about the next deal, the next game, the next kind of production cycle. It's hard. And people don't have the right framework or skills like they do with programming or art or modeling, animation, that kind of stuff. You don't learn how to do business development for games at a university at the moment, or like a course.
Yeah, you literally don't, because nobody teaches that.
No, of course
we were
not.
talking about that on Twitter this morning with Indie Gamer Chick and another studio out in Colorado. It's one of the biggest issues is these universities will go out and they'll tell a kid, it's like, yeah, come pay us a bunch of money, and 2 to 4 years down the road you'll have a game design degree. That does you no good if you don't understand the basics of this is how you do a budget, this is how you plan to go and find a publisher, and this is how you do it. They literally don't teach the business side of it anywhere. So along those lines, then, for people who are in that spot that you were in 14, 15 years ago, what's the best path that you see to becoming an indie developer?
Wait, I'm just doing some maths in my head. 12 years ago. 12. It has to be 12. Okay. Yeah. There was an overlap when I was working in games and I was working in bouncing. They did, because I was on a very, very crap salary when I was first working as a junior in games. So I had to continue working at nights just to be able to make rent and everything like that. Yeah. So what would be the best path would be, it's actually and I hate to say this, but it's an easy answer to that question. It's just people need to just build games. I always the one thing that I always did, which and this is something that I'll always say it to people, your life circumstances might be different. You may not have the money, the time. You may have people in your life that need help and support from you, so you may not have the resources to build games or to learn new skills. That's fine, but it never stops you from adapting to that condition. You could build something on paper. You could build something in a notepad. I've got notebooks of just weird game ideas that I'll write down all the time. And when people say that ideas are cheap, it's because they've never patented an idea or they've never got money for pitching an idea, but it's also that they can be quite valuable and they help exercise your mind as well. Also, I think that building games, we were game jamming a lot a long time ago now, and it really helps you get into the cycle of, you plan, you build, you let go of your fear. A lot of indies, when they're especially juniors, will treat their game ideas as if they're going to be, the next indie rock star. And they stop looking at their games as being either, just content, whether it's commercial or expressive. It depends on the developer, but it's things that you plan and build and then you release out into the wild and then you move on, you build a new one. There's no magnum opus that someone's going to build off their first thing. And any of the developers that have done that are statistically, just lightning in a bottle at that stage. So the best thing that people can do is just to build really, really quick disposable games, but at least finish them. Have your menus, your levels, your audio plugged in, even a credit screen, core gameplay loops, at least do a little bit of play testing and a little website on itch for it, and then move on to the next one, and then keep doing that. It's very unlikely for someone doing that to not eventually get picked up by a studio, because it just makes the best type of junior that you can hire.
Yeah, someone that has the drive and has actually completed a game. Because there's a lot of game developers that have never actually completed a game.
Yep. Mm-hmm. It's one of the most understated yet most important parts of not only getting a job, but getting publishing deals, getting bank loans. There's a 100%. Lot of, knowledge there that people don't realize. Even if you're going to the bank and saying, hey, look, I want a traditional loan for my game. One, congratulations that you found a bank that would even let you say that.
So we got a question from Nightwolf. Would making your own itch/Steam games or publish that could take weeks, months, years, etc., or joining game jams be better use of your time to get into the industry, or at least have a resume?
Oh yeah, help both of them. And I say this right because we put our money where our mouth is. So at Mayday, we have no minimum qualifications and no minimum years. We look at the games that people have made or their body of work, and like that meant that we had a lot of applications, but we just looked at people's games. That's all it was. And I would recommend a game a week. That's really good. Like pair up with someone, take turns designing, or if you're a programmer and the other person's an artist, take turns on being the designer. If you're 3 people, take turns on being the producer or designer, and essentially just start creating a backlog. There was pretty much every single person that we hired in our company right now is someone who's made their own game. And I have no idea who has a degree and who doesn't have a degree. And yeah, like I personally hired every one of them, and I could not tell you the minimum years or the degrees of any of those people at this point. Like, it's just not relevant when we can look at their work and look at their skill set, and play it and understand where they're coming from. Because it's so easy to get a piece of paper that says, congratulations, you've completed this course, but what you've produced and what you've made speaks like volumes in comparison.
All right, so this conversation we're having is timely for a whole new reason now. This article just dropped this morning. Another article about the human cost of game development this time on Call of Duty Black Ops 4 from Treyarch.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not even going to read it right now because 1, it's probably long, and 2, it probably says the same thing that we see every single time one of these articles comes out. It's, we'll do better next time. No, you won't. It's just I mean,
no, you
none
won't.
of this for people who have been in the industry for even 3 years. None of this comes as a surprise. People that are like jaw dropping it, like, I can't believe it happens. Then you ain't been around long enough, because this is normal. It shouldn't be, but it is. So, that completely derailed me from the next question I had. Okay, all right, game jams. We've seen them grow in popularity over the last 5-10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Explain why those are important.
Well, restraints are good in production, and I think that restraints, in terms of time and managing people and having a focused goal, is really good. And the game jam kind of ecosystem is currently undergoing a lot of like strong debate and discourse around kind of sustainable jamming. So the idea of like, caffeinated overnight kind of development teams crunching away, that stuff is just, it doesn't mean that the team is good. They're not going to make a good game out of that. It is now that people are trying to say, all right, like we've got 2 work days to jam out like a product. There's a lot of teams, I think, that are getting much better with that. And it's something that teaches people a good discipline about prototyping and proof of concept. So a lot of people that have been through the publisher cycle will tell you that a prototype is worth its weight in gold, more than a pitch deck is. And obviously, like, a game that's a demo stage or a game that's pretty much close to completion, they're very likely to get signed up by someone. But being able to show a prototype, even if it's just placeholder assets, is always a really, really good skill for a team to have. And we've had some great IP get created from game jams. The one that comes to mind is Superhot, right? Like that's the one of the big kind of pinnacles of a game jam product that ended up becoming, a multi-million-dollar kind of intellectual property. They have 40 developers now in Poland, in a city called Łódź. and I visited them as well, and it's weird seeing the impact they've had in the city. They had like, giant murals and stuff like that. All of it is from like literally a team sat down for a game jam and just said like, what can we build in 2 days, and boom, you've got 40 people employed, and you've got probably one of the highest selling VR games of all time now as well.
Yeah. That game has done extremely well and made folks plenty of money.
Yes,
right, so
definitely.
We've got a question from Broad Strokes. He says, let's say you have an LLC focused on the product itself, presented at conventions, do a pitch deck, prototype is working, but it's not done, and you need capital to finish it in a realistic time frame. He says, our experience from going through publishers has been come back when it's done. But various smaller investors have told us to hit impact investors or startup investors. In short, how do you find non-game investors and get them involved? What sort of world do you need to look into or enter to get that foot in the door?
No, that's a good question. Publishers saying come back when it's done in this current ecosystem speaks more about the publishers than about their attempts. It's not like it's not always common for pubs to be like, great game. Let us know when you want to like when you're ready to kind of sign it up, because the power dynamic is really like shifted at that point as well. From the conversations that we've had previously, and we're always like shopping different ideas around. There's like 2 stages. One is that if they really like an idea, they'll probably fund you at a very early level because your pedigree and the idea have merit. But if you're too high of a risk, they may wait to see if the game is matured more. But a publisher saying come back when it's done, it's really strange because they don't like. There's no power there. There's no like leverage that someone would have in that circumstance, because you can shop it to. Like you can go on Twitter and say our game's done, we need a publisher, and you'll probably get like 40 different people DMing saying, hey, we'll market it, we'll do it, etc. Because it costs them very little comparatively to funding the production cycle. That's an interesting concept. In terms of non-games funding, it's very region specific because the ecosystems can be quite different. Our experience in Australia or the Australian New Zealand kind of environment has been that investors tend to be quite skittish and risk adverse. But if you look at Europe, for example, the investment ecosystem there is much more aggressive around games funding. I think it was Angry Birds, Clash of Clans that received millions of euros in funding from a bank. And I think it was the same thing for Angry Birds as well. Like there is this idea that you can shop your game or your intellectual property around for bank or institutional funding if you're in the right location or the right country. If you're in ANZ, you're not going to get that opportunity. If you're in the US, it's probably going to be really difficult to do that. And in terms of any startup capital funding, it depends on what you're building. If it's just a game, I think it's always doable, especially free to play games or games as a service models have been quite successful in the past. But I'd imagine that the current ecosystem is going to be a little bit apprehensive because they're waiting to see what the next generation of games as a service or streaming games kind of ecosystems will do. There's no point funding a free to play game when you're worried that everyone's going to be switching to games as a Netflix in 2-3 years time. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's pretty early here at the moment, so I gave it a shot.
No, I mean that's so. My first, I agree. If publishers are always going to want to see it when it's done, it eliminates the risk that they have, and so. I see a lot of teams come back from conferences, E3s or GDCs, and they're like, we had so much interest in our game. And I'm like, that's awesome. Tell me how that works out 2 weeks from now, because a publisher is always going to tell you that they like what they see. They want to see more. That's just instinct. And it's because they don't want to be that company that, has to turn around in 2 years and go, yeah, we had a chance to sign, Angry Birds and we didn't. And so, yeah, we kind of screwed up there. They're always going to want to see more. My first question is, to broad strokes would be, how many publishers did you go to? Did you go to 5, 10, 20, 50, 100? I mean, we track over 600 publishers globally. There's a lot of publishers out there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want that list, we actually have it for you. Go to our website, the powellgroupconsulting.com, and a handy dandy little pop-up will pop up on the screen and say, hey, do you want a list of 500 plus publishers? Put your email in there and it'll send you a list. But, I always recommend going, if you have to get money, the publisher route before the investor route. And it's an umbrella statement from me because, like Emre said, it's very regional. Companies in Canada have access to, regional funding and the Canadian Media Fund, the CMF. Companies in the US don't. There's, depending on where you are, your options for funding vary. In Germany, you can go and put together a pitch and get a fund set up just like you're doing a movie, but it's for a game. And so it's always going to vary. But when I talk to developers and they're like, we shopped it to publishers, but no one was interested, I always want to know how many you shopped it to, because there's chances are there are more. And if you've got that good demo, that good proof of concept, you can find a publisher. It's just, it might take a lot of work, but they are out there.
Oh, it takes tremendous amounts of work. Like, I know that for us, it took a long time. It took 6 months to get something signed. And on our deck, I know 6 months doesn't sound long, but it's like we did have advantage of pedigree, because I had for my personal thing anyway, was that I had won the Studio of the Year in the Australian industry and the Game of the Year on the same year. Jay from Epic was a guy who gave me the award for it, and Josh was also an internationally acclaimed indie game developer. So even under those circumstances, I think that we would have conversations with probably 20, 30 at least pubs who just say the same thing. It doesn't cost them anything to say, I like it, let's see it when there's a prototype, or I like it, bring it to me in a couple of months when you've worked on it a little bit more, because they don't have to put any money in. People can say they like stuff all they want because there's no commitment there. So the best type of advice I've always been given is that if you want to gauge how real someone is with that kind of discussion, you have to time box it and say, if you like it, we're looking to sign in the next 3 months or the next 6 months or the next 8 months. So we need to kind of put that time box in place, and then you'll find out very quickly how much someone goes from I like it to it's just not what we're looking for. It's not a part of our portfolio. They'll give you proper reasons for it very quickly, because they're the same as anyone else. Like, they need to keep a Rolodex of. And for those of you that don't know what a Rolodex is, they need to keep a contact list of games, and they keep progress updates on this stuff. Like, they have account managers who'll email game dev teams all the time and say, hey, what are you up to? I'm going to be in town. I want to check out what you're doing, or has there been any progress in the game? Because they're always looking to sign things up on a cycle.
It's an old-timey spreadsheet. That's
an old-timey spreadsheet. Yeah. Yeah.
You sometimes find them with these things called business cards. All right.
Oh yeah, business cards.
We're coming up, and we've already passed our hour, and so that means it's probably roughly 5 a.m. your time over there.
It is, yep.
In New Zealand. So I'm gonna cut it short. If you've got questions, throw them up right now. Broadstroke says, we're in the U.S. The game we're working on is a Switch title, currently working on the device, real-time, full vertical slice. It's been a big back and forth, as you mentioned, and show us more. Yeah. Going to GDC, various smaller conventions locally on the East Coast of the U.S. We've been featured by Epic on various occasions, so we're trying to find the right route. It's the last 2 years of development going to focus on GDCs. Roustroke, seriously, go to our Discord if you're not already on our Discord and send me a message. Happy to, see what we can do to help, all that kind of good stuff too. If anyone else has got any questions for Emre, pop them up, let us know. In the meantime, I will say we do actually have the podcast up running. So go to anchor.fm and /Indie Game Business. And
you have a command in there for that?
This
exclamation mark podcast? No?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you over me.
Oh, he said, you do. You got exclamation mark podcast. Okay.
Yeah, there we go. Look at that. I don't even remember doing that. That's just, awesome. You can go there, find it. We'll get this interview up just as soon as humanly possible. If you want to find out more about the business networking event that we talked about, just go to indiegame.business and it'll have all the info and all the wonderful things that people who have attended have said. And of course, links to get tickets and that sort of stuff. So that's coming up July 17th and 18th. Mm-hmm. We're trying to do them every 3 months. So, we'll keep you posted on that. But with that, I don't see anything popping up. Emery, dude, thank you so much for
thanks for getting up so early,
doing this, and for doing it at the hour that you did it.
It's okay. I'm always happy to chat when it comes to game dev biz stuff. So it's always a pleasure.
Well, I hope you'll stick around, the Discord for, whenever, and be certain to, share all the stuff, any news that you've got, that sort of stuff. And
totally.
Yeah, man. Awesome. You got anything else, Indy?
No, I'm good. Thank you so much for coming on.
All right. Well, let's
cheers.
Get a little bit of sleep before he goes to work.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Y'all take care.